Hello, it's Mrs. McCullough. Today we're continuing on with our series about how readers compare texts. And we've been learning about the steps in which readers do this. First is step number 1. They list the reading voice details and some of their thoughts from the first text. We'll call that text A. Then step 2, they list the reading voice details and the thoughts from text B. They also have to think about how they're going to group this information. So you group the related information in the category that it needs. Now, so far I've been giving you the categories. We've been doing stories, and so stories always have the same categories down the middle. We have the character and what the character wants, what motivates him. We also have the setting, which could be place, but could also be time. And then we have these three things that kind of go together in the same category. We've got the problem. Remember the flag? What is the problem? We've got the events, the little happenings that took place, and the solution. How was it solved at the end? We also have one more category whenever we're talking about stories, and that's the theme or the message that the author teaches me. And so those are the categories that we'll need. That's steps 1 through 4. Now, the powerful part of this is using a T-chart, because a T-chart helps us keep all of the information organized, so that when we're ready at the end to really do that comparison thinking, what we're going to do is we're going to look across each row and we're trying to see how two very different texts are similar. Remember, I said adults have a saying about this. They say it's like comparing apples to oranges, two very different things, and we're trying to see how they are similar. Okay, so that's what we've been doing. We've been looking at text that's very different, things that you didn't even think were similar until we really started collecting the details in this organized way and looking across. Now, you could just look at the information and think about it. You could just orally say it like what we did last time. But you know what a lot of readers do? They write it down. And sometimes your teacher might want you to write it down. You'll be asked to compare these two texts, and you've got to do some sort of writing assignment, turn it into some sentences and paragraphs. Well, let me tell you, don't get freaked out. There's a trick to this, and I'm going to let you in on the secret. You see, the secret is all based on the T-chart that you're using. Yep. It's the rows and how they go across. So what you're going to do is you're going to look at each row. You're going to look at text A in this category and text B. And then you are going to use some of those sentence stems. Well, actually, they're more like transition words. You're going to use some of the transition words to help us talk about these things. Okay, so like both text A and text B have something about the character. Or text A and text B are similar because they have the same message or something like that. Okay, and so these are some of the words that we'll use as we're thinking through how are they the same. Remember, it's very easy to tell how two different things are different, but what we're focusing on right now is how two different things are the same. Now, if we had more lessons later on in the year, we might do the different part, but you know what? That's easy. I'm letting you in on the hard part. I'm showing you how you can do this harder thinking. Okay, so after we've decided how they are the same or similar, then what we're going to do is we're going to write it. We're going to write down our sentence. We're going to write down something about each row. We're going to look at it row by row by row. So let's try this. You can do this. Remember when we were talking about two very different texts? We were talking about The Wizard of Oz and we were talking about Finding Nemo. Two very different texts, but we collected the information. So we did steps 1 and 2. We collected the information that were the story elements, main characters, the main setting, the plot summary, the theme, the message, something like that. Okay, so these were all the details. We've already done steps 1 and 2. Then we actually started thinking about how they were a little bit similar. And we even noticed some of the things that were similar. Sometimes it'll say the exact same words, but sometimes in order to figure out how they're similar, you got to really tap into that thinking voice. Okay, so let's try this. Let's look at just one row because we're going to look at each row one at a time and we're going to do the thinking and then we'll write about it. Okay, so my thinking voice looks at this and says right away, okay, I see that both Dorothy wanted to get home and Nemo wanted to get home. Okay, so how could I say something like this? Now, I usually want to tell what text it is that I'm comparing. So I might put in the titles of the text. I might say something like both The Wizard of Oz and Finding Nemo have characters who want to get home. Okay, hear how I use some of these words? But if I keep looking at it, see how I marked these yellow? Because even though they're not the exact same details, they're not the same reading voice details. No. Those are different words. But when I look at it and I think about it, I think about how they're kind of the same. You see, my thinking voice tells me that these were a group of friends who helped Dorothy get what she wanted, which was to go home. And Gil and the Tank Gang, all the other characters in there, the Starfish and everybody else, they were a group of friends that helped Nemo get home, right? So if I'm thinking about this, then I might put these together. I might say The Wizard of Oz and Finding Nemo are alike because they each have a group of friends that want to help them get home. Okay, so we're doing the thinking. Guess what? Once you've done the thinking, you know what you need to do? You just need to write it down. And you could write it anywhere. You could start a Google Doc and you could type it. You could write it on just notebook paper. Sometimes I write it on a sticky note. You could write it anywhere. I wrote it in this document. So here are the two that I was just talking about. Both The Wizard of Oz and Finding Nemo have characters who are trying to get back home. See how I'm using those details, but then also my thinking voice. All right. And especially when we started talking about the friends. Here we have the friends. The Wizard of Oz and Finding Nemo are alike because they each have a group of friends who try to help the main character solve the problem. Ding, ding, ding. That's my thinking voice. Nowhere in the text did it say that. I thought it. Nowhere in my T-chart did it say that. I thought it. So when you're comparing, you have to really tap into that thinking voice. Okay? And then write it down or type it up. If you can say it, you can write it. Okay? So now, look at the other one that I chose. I chose a totally different sentence starter, transition here, totally different. And this time, I didn't want to keep saying the name of the movies, because they're long, right? The Wizard of Oz and Finding Nemo, The Wizard of Oz and Finding Nemo. That gets long. So then I just shortened it and I said, the movies are similar because they both have an evil character who wants to keep the main character. Yeah, look at that. See how I highlighted the Wicked Witch of the West and the dentist and Darla? That was what my thinking voice started telling me. Well, looky there. There's an evil character And, is the dentist and Darla's a little girl? Is she really evil? Not necessarily, but we don't want Nemo there, right? We want Nemo to be free. Plus, Darla killed the last fish. So that's what we have to do. We have to really start to look across the rows and look at how they could be similar and tap into that thinking voice. And if you can say it, you can write it. Okay. Let's try one more. Now let's change rows. Let's look at the main setting. Okay. So when I look at this and I see it says, Kansas and Munchkin Land and Emerald City and over several days. Well, this is totally different. Great Barrier Reef, dentist office, the ocean, over several days. Now that's the same, right? That's the same. So I could say something like that about the Wizard of Oz and Finding Nemo. They both happen over several days. I could say something like that. Both have. I'm using those words. But I got to tap into this thinking voice, guys. Kansas? No. Great Barrier Reef. That's where the characters lived. Munchkin Land? Dentist office? That's where they ended up, right? And they don't want to be there. Emerald City? In the ocean, way out in the ocean, the EAC. They don't want to be there. They want to get back home. So when I started thinking about that, I thought about how in both of these texts, both have settings, because that's where we are, that start in one place and end up in another. They both have settings that begin at home and then end up in a land very far from home. Okay? So how could we say that? I could use this sentence stem or transition word and look at that. The Wizard of Oz and Finding Nemo both have settings that take place at the home of the character and then in a land far away from home. Okay, see how these were not identical, but my thinking voice had to compare and start to really tap into how could they be similar. Okay? All right. I want you to help me with this. Seriously, let's keep going with these two. So now we've got the next part here. We've got the plot summary. So if we are looking at the details that we collected in The Wizard of Oz, stuck in the land of Oz, trying to get home, has to stay away from the Wicked Witch of the West, and then taps heels together and it was a dream. Okay. And then if we look across the row, we've got Finding Nemo, stuck in the dentist office, trying to get home, has to stay away from Darla. And then Marlin and Dory are looking for Nemo, and Gil helps Nemo escape through the drain. Okay. So what if we start thinking about the problem here? What if we start thinking about the problem? What could we say? Well, this even says stuck in and stuck in. So one stuck in Oz and one stuck in the dentist office. So how could we say this? The Wizard of Oz and Finding Nemo, which one do you want to use? Maybe this one? Are similar because, why are they similar? The character gets stuck away from home. Maybe something like that. Is that what you were thinking? Okay, good. I want you to really try to tap into that thinking, choosing which transition word makes the most sense and how would you put it together. Okay. Now these say trying to get home and trying to get home, and we already kind of talked about those. This also says stay away from the Wicked Witch of the West and stay away from Darla. So maybe we could add some of those in if we wanted to. So how could we maybe talk about this one, the Wicked Witch of the West and stay away from Darla? What would we say? So let's see. Both movies have an evil character who's trying to keep, is that what you were thinking? Keep the main character. You're thinking something like that? Okay, so it's all about looking across, deciding how they're similar, using that thinking voice, and then choosing a transition statement to help us say it. Okay, that's how writers do this. So here's one. The Wizard of Oz and Finding Nemo are similar because as characters are trying to get back home, they are also trying to stay away from the evil character, right? So it's almost like they have two problems now. They want to get home and they got to stay away from the evil ones. All right, guys, you're getting so good at this. Notice the process. Notice how you have to go across each row. You have to tap into that thinking voice because it doesn't always verbatim say it word for word. You have to really think about how they're similar. Then you have to decide which sentence transitions that you want to use. So which transition best fits, and then say it. Say what your thinking voice is thinking about how they're similar. Okay, so now let's see if we can try one more. Let's see if we can focus on the theme. Can you do that? Okay, so we've got 3 different themes there that are pretty much the same. Home is the best place to be. True friends will help each other. Good always triumphs over evil. They pretty much had the same exact theme or message. Now, how do we want to state this, though? Do we want to say The Wizard of Oz and Finding Nemo? Do we want to say both movies? What do we want to say? You want to go ahead and say the whole movie? Okay, so The Wizard of Oz and Finding Nemo both have the same theme about how true friends always help each other. You think something like that? Okay, so notice how we did it. We have to name either both movies or we have to use the actual names. Then we have to choose one of these transitions, and then we have to say how they are similar. And it really does take your thinking voice to go across each row and really try to see it, okay? All right, because it's easy to compare two things that are the same. It's much harder to compare two things that are different. And so what we've been trying to do is to find out how two very different things are similar. And that's why we're only focusing on the similarities right now, because that's the hardest part. Okay, so I think you're getting this. I think you really are understanding. Now, we've already done a lot of work on the listing and the grouping and the categories. So to have you do your assignment, we've already done this part. We're going to use the text A Bad Case of Stripes and After the Fall. Okay, we're going to go back. We're going to go back to these texts again. A Bad Case of Stripes and After the Fall. We've already done all this work. Now, all you have to do is this work. You're going to look across each row for character, and you're going to try to figure out how are they similar. You'll choose a transition statement here. Which one do you want to use? You'll say it, and then you'll write it. You can type it or you can write it on paper, either one, okay? So here is the actual page that you'll see on your student resource. Well, let me just show you your student resource. Here's your student resource, all right? And so that's all of steps 1 through 4. All you have to do is the thinking across, and then you'll use some of these transition words below. You'll look across each row, think about how the details are similar, and write a sentence or 2 about each row, because we actually did a couple of these for some of them. Not all of them, but for some of them, okay? That'll be the assignment if you're in Mrs. McCullough's class, but your teacher might have an even better idea.